This is the Fat Health Teacher, and today's topic is suicide and self harm. This was prompted by my friends who is no longer here. He was the person who previously owned Apollo. I think of him often, and I think part of why it's been hard for me, I can't even imagine what his family's going through. But I think what's been hard for me is that I had known him for a long time. After he got married and had a child, I didn't have any contact with him. This was not my choice, this was his. Apparently, things kind of fell apart and he moved to San Francisco. He got back in touch with me on my birthday in 2015, which was really neat. It was like a birthday surprise. It was fantastic. He encouraged me to come out. He really wanted me to come visit him during Christmas. Things hadn't quite reached a boiling point with Bob, but essentially I had to tell him that I couldn't come see him. And a couple of days later, I received a phone call from his work. He had listed me as an emergency contact, and they wanted to know if I'd heard from him because he had not reported for several days. This is odd, and I had not heard from him. I tried calling him, I left messages. I didn't even know where he lived so that I could send the police to his house. About a week later, I was told that a friend went to check on him and they found him in his room. I didn't get any details because honestly the details aren't important. But my understanding is that this was an issue of self harm. Anyway, since that point in time, I felt guilt, but I also understand that this was his choice and that he did not communicate with me, and I was not aware of what was going on with him. And I wish that I had known because then I could have helped. I could have dropped everything and gone to see him because I would have had I known how serious this was. I didn't know that he was attempting to reach out, but that he didn't know how to ask for help. And I think that that's what's happened. That is what happened. His thoughts then led me to remember a student who committed suicide while I was teaching high school. I did not know this student. He used a shotgun. That hit the community very hard. I have another friend who was visiting with her very good friend, and the husband of her very good friend had a pistol and shot himself. My friend witnessed everything, so this was terrible. I believe the wife also witnessed everything, and this is not one of those things that you just shake off. It's not something where you just say, "Oh wow, they attempted." So one of the things that I want you to understand is I am going to do my best not to use the language of they committed suicide, but more that they completed suicide. When Robin Williams died, I saw a lot of stuff online, people talking about how selfish he was, people talking about how he didn't think of the family, and that this was absolutely cruel for him. Uh, and it was tough. And what I'm going to share with you is something that pretty much only my close family knows. But about 15 years ago, which is why I feel like I can talk about it now, I went through a very major depression. I was not getting the help that I needed because I felt that getting help meant that I was weak. And getting help was exposing myself, showing people that I couldn't handle things, that something must be wrong with me. These were all things that were going through my head. As I said, I did not get help. At least not at that point. I remember going to visit a friend. We'll call him Ford. I went to see him, and it was kind of my last ditch effort to shake the ideations that I was dealing with, and I was able to not complete suicide. What I did, I remember I was driving home from his apartment, and on the way home, every time I saw a semi, all I could think of was, if I just move the car over, I could just slam head on into that semi, and then I won't have to deal with this anymore. And it wasn't selfish. It wasn't despair. It wasn't crying out for help. Actually, I think it was a bit despair. It was like I was looking at everything through a veil, and I couldn't see anything positive. Everything that was positive in my life felt like it was gone. It felt like it was ripped away. I didn't have a safe place or a comforting place to go. Uh, I could not rely on people that were around me because they were all, and this was totally me making this call. This was not me actually reaching out to them. But I felt like I couldn't rely on anybody because they all had their own stuff to deal with, and I did not want to compound what was going on with them. Um, I believe at that time I was still living with a friend and her family. They had a whole lot going on. They have a special needs child, and the my friend has a lot of medical issues. So I didn't feel like I could talk to them about what was going on. My family was not close. I couldn't get a hold of them, or they were also dealing with their own things, and I didn't want to burden them because I was supposed to be the strong one in the family. I'm the oldest. Um, so anyway, I knew I was in trouble. This was Halloween. What I ended up doing is I told myself that if I felt the same way, well, first, I didn't do the semi thing because I didn't think that it was fair to a semi driver to do that to him or her. I didn't want to ruin their livelihood. I didn't want to cause a whole mess. Basically, I didn't want to inconvenience anyone in any way, not even with my suicide. So I went home and I thought long and hard, and I thought heavily about just ending things in the bathtub. But I didn't want the children to find me. So then I made a plan, and I decided that if I still felt this way in 3 or 4 weeks, I planned to drive to an isolated area, to walk some distance away, and basically abandon my vehicle, and then, as I said, use pills or razor or both. And the reason I wasn't going to do this in my car is because I didn't want somebody to have to clean up that mess. This should tell you where I felt my value was in the scheme of things. It was very low. I felt that everyone else ranked higher and deserved more. So I was putting everybody ahead of me. I was attempting to be considerate, and I truly believed that the world would not notice that I was gone. That if I disappeared, it would be days before anyone even noticed. And that work would notice first, but only because I inconvenienced them by not being there to do my job. Once I realized how bad this was, I went and talked to a school counselor who was also a good friend at that time. So I reached out to the school counselor, and she talked to me, and she said, you know what, this is way beyond anything that I can do. You need to go and talk to a counselor. You need to talk to your doctor. So I did both. I got put on meds. I attempted to talk with a counselor, and the first one that I talked to just did not work for me. I can't explain why, but apparently this is a common thing for you not to click with your counselor, or not to click with a counselor on the first try. So that counselor didn't work. I ended up seeking out a different counselor. This person was the first person to make me feel, and this is in a long time, the first person in a long time, where I felt like I was being heard and where I felt that things were validated. And I would tell him the things that happened in my life, and he would say, wow. So instead of um, remember I talked about not minimizing people's things? So I was doing that to myself. And all the stuff that I had lived through, everything that I looked at, I was finding people who had it worse, right? But this wasn't actually making me feel better. It wasn't making me feel lucky because what happened still was awful. And I'm not going to go into details in what those things were at this time. I don't know that I ever will, at least not at this level of public. Anyway, so suicide has had a very big impact on my life, both personally and with people that I've worked with. Bob has actually attempted twice. I believe he has had suicidal ideation more than that. I looked up some history. I wanted you to be aware, if you have not been personally impacted by suicide, of where it ranks. So, in the United States, suicide is the 10th leading cause of death for all deaths. It is 10th behind 8 medical causes, including cardiovascular disease and stroke and heart attack, and accidental deaths. Okay, so this would be, somebody tripped and then got run over kind of thing. It's 10th. Homicide is ranked 17th, just to put it in perspective. So people killing themselves is happening more often than people killing other people. If you look at the age group of 15 to 24-year-olds, suicide is the second leading cause of death in the nation. 105 people every day are dying as a result of suicide. Depression affects between 20 and 25% of us. And only half of the people who have depression are actually getting treatment. This is concerning because if you look at comorbidities or cofactors, mental illness and substance abuse are connected to 90% of the suicides that are completed. This is insane. The rate is so high. And so when we have these gun crimes and people say we need to look at mental health, they're right. We do need to look at mental health, but not just because of those gun crimes, but because we have a quarter of our population who is dealing with major depression, and half of them are trying to do it by themselves. And that's not to say that they can't do it. If you watched my video yesterday, even when somebody's completely isolated, people can succeed, but it is really, really hard. It is really hard to succeed when you have that many things working against you. For the state of New Mexico, we are 7th. It is the 7th leading cause of death in New Mexico. It is second among people between the ages of 10 and 39. We are 5th in the nation for suicide. Our suicide rate is 50% more than the national average. That's crazy. Over 200. Men are 3 times more likely to have completed suicide. More than half of all suicides are done with a firearm. This is just... I'm not going to get a bandwagon here and say that we need to ban firearms, but I definitely think that we need to enforce the rules that are already there at the very least. Guns are not supposed to be stored loaded. Guns are supposed to be using a trigger lock, and they should be in a locked cabinet with the ammo stored in a different location. This is safety, so that we don't have the contributions to the accidental deaths, which is important. But also, the more inconvenient something is, the less likely somebody is to do it. So if they don't have access to meds that will put them to sleep, they would be less likely to do it. If they don't have easy access to a gun, they're going to be less likely to do it. Because what you're doing is you're removing options. And that's not to say that somebody who's determined is not going to find a way to do it. Much like murder, if you believe somebody needs to die, even if it's yourself, you will find a way to make yourself die. But each of these delays can allow the person to have a little bit more time to consider what's happening and a little bit more time to get help. Okay? I wanted to share with you before I go into the signs and symptoms it's kind of a comic. It's a poster, and this is from the Boggle Owl. And I'm going to go ahead and read it out loud. I know that y'all can read, but this was a very powerful thing to me. And I hear this whole cry for help thing a lot. I hear, well, if they meant to do it, then they wouldn't have told anyone. Okay? So, here we go. I don't like the phrase a cry for help. I just don't like how it sounds. When somebody says to me, I'm thinking about suicide, I have a plan, I just need a reason not to do it, the last thing I see is helplessness. I think your depression has been beating you up for years. It's called you ugly and stupid and pathetic and a failure for so long that you've forgotten that it's wrong. You don't see any good in yourself, and you don't have any hope. But still, here you are. You've come over to me, banged on my door, and said, hey, staying alive is really hard right now. Just give me something to fight with. I don't care if it's a stick. Give me a stick and I can stay alive. How is that helpless? I think that's incredible. You're like a Marine, trapped for years behind enemy lines. Your gun has been taken away, you're out of ammo, you're malnourished, and you've probably caught some kind of jungle virus that's making you hallucinate giant spiders. And you're still just going, give me a stick, I'm not dying out here. A cry for help makes it sound like I'm supposed to take pity on you. But you don't need my pity. This isn't pathetic. This is the will to survive. This is how humans lived long enough to become the dominant species. With no hope, running on nothing, you are ready to cut through 100 miles of hostile jungle with nothing but a stick, if that's what it takes to get to safety. All I'm doing is handing out sticks. You're the one staying alive. Boggle Owl has a Facebook page. If you go to it, you will find many more of these inspirational cartoons or posters, however you want to phrase it. You will also find that there are some, not quite call and response, but people have written to this author, and the person responded with a cartoon or a comic sketch. Alright, what I want to do next is go over some of the signs and symptoms. Now, if you are dealing with depression, it may not even be something that you are fully aware of, which is why I want to talk to you about it. Okay, so let's start first with symptoms or warnings that somebody may be coping with suicidal ideation. They may actively be talking about wanting to die or kill themselves. They may be looking for a way to do it. They may feel hopeless and say that they have no reason to live. They may feel trapped or be in unbearable pain. And this can be both physical as well as emotional. They feel like they're a burden to others. They may have increased their use of alcohol or drugs. They may act anxious or agitated, and they may be taking risks that they wouldn't normally take. They may be sleeping a lot or not much. They may be withdrawn or isolating themselves. They may show anger and talk about seeking revenge. Speaking personally, when I was looking at suicide, as I said, many, many years ago, I had a lot of these symptoms. Being isolated, feeling like I was a burden. I wasn't using alcohol and drugs just because it doesn't do a whole lot for me. I wasn't angry, but I was thinking, if I'm gone, then people will know. And it seems like it doesn't really work together, but in the head of somebody who is at this point, it can make sense. Even if to somebody who's not coping with depression, who's not idealizing suicide, it doesn't make sense. The person may have a preoccupation with death. They may be getting their affairs in order. They may be happier and calmer. And part of this comes from they've made the decision. They may lose interest in the things that they normally care about. They may give things away, including their prized possessions. They may be visiting or calling people to say their last goodbyes. If you are here, please call 911 or go to an emergency room. Do not stay alone. Reach out to somebody. I know that it's hard. I know that it's hard. And I know that you are exposing yourself. And that sometimes the people that you reach out to don't know how to respond. But I want to talk about that. First, I want to give the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-TALK. That's 1-800-273-TALK. If you feel like this is something that is a legitimate option for you, please reach out for help. And if you're feeling low, reach out for help. Medication can help. It takes some time to kick in. Counseling can help, but you actually have to be willing to do the work. And it's hard. Much like the Boggle Owl said, stepping outside of what you know and letting somebody into your pain can be very, very difficult. All right. If someone you know is suicidal, then talk to them. That's the very, very first thing. Remember I talked about people needing to be seen? I felt like nobody saw me. I felt like no one had any idea of what I was going through. And to agree, this was absolutely true because I was hiding it. I was putting on a show, letting people believe that things were okay, even though inside I felt incredibly broken. You can actually talk to them directly. Have you ever thought about suicide? Do you have a plan? When are you thinking about doing it? How are you going to do it? Doing these things is not putting the idea into their head, much like talking about condoms and talking about birth control is not encouraging somebody to have sex. You are collecting information and you are trying to figure out, like, how important is this? How emergent is this situation? And if you don't feel like you have the ability to assess this on your own, please stay with the person and get them to a hospital or call 911 to let them know what's going on. Sometimes people reach out digitally, so they may post something on Facebook, they may call a friend, and you're not physically there with them. This would be a very appropriate time to call 911. Okay? If somebody is telling you that they're thinking about suicide and they say, please don't tell anyone, this is not something that you should actually keep a secret. I always tell people, I tell my students, if the things that you are telling me lead me to believe that you are in immediate danger or that you are going to harm somebody else, then I will be reporting it. And I'm going to talk a little bit about self-harm, but reporting is necessary. Don't minimize what a person is feeling or shame them. Don't tell them that they're being selfish. Trying to convince them that it's not that bad or that they have everything to live for or that if they kill themselves, then the people who are talking about them are going to win is not going to work. You can tell them that it gets better and that with help they won't feel this way, hopefully. If you believe that the person is in immediate danger, work with them to get help. Tell them that you will not leave them alone. And I know this is really hard because you have your own life to lead, but it is really important to take the time. And I don't know about you, but if somebody's coming to me and they're at this point in their lives, I don't want to take the risk, especially after losing my friend, that they're going to do something while I'm busy with something else. Okay? All right. In the state of New Mexico, we have a couple of crisis hotlines that are a little different. The first one is 1-855 NM Crisis. So that's 1-855-662-7474. We also have Agora. Now, Agora is a New Mexico crisis line that is run by the University of New Mexico, or rather, they work with the University of New Mexico. Their phone number is 505 277 3017. And what's really nice, I will have to do some more research, but they are always available. So this is a 24-hour line. You can chat with them online at agoracares.org. You can call them. They will train volunteers, and they work their butts off. They also have an 800 number, which is 855 505 4505. So if you're worried about calling long distance or anything like that, you can still get to somebody who will help you. They can connect you to resources. They are trained to talk you down. They can help. So if you feel like you have nobody else, call one of the hotlines, because these people are there for you. That's the entire reason that they have this job. They don't know who you are. You're not going to see them in the real world. You can talk to them and they're not going to judge you. The only time people from a crisis hotline are not going to listen to you is if you are abusing them. So as long as you are not calling them names, things along those lines, then you're going to be okay, and they will listen. We also have the Rape Crisis Center. The phone number for the Rape Crisis Center is 266-7711, and the area code on that is 505. Now, this is kind of a very specific group, but they are also trained to deal with people who are in emergent situations. They are there for you to talk. It is anonymous. They're not collecting your phone number, but they have access to resources, or they can connect you to resources that you may not be aware of. The thing that I want to talk about finally is self-harm. There is a misconception that people who are self-harming are planning to kill themselves, and this is not always the case. People who are self-harming, 60% of them do not ever consider suicide, and a majority of them don't consider it most of the time. Okay? Self-harm is not suicidal ideation. It can take a lot of forms. It can be cuts, scratches, bruising, burns. It can be needles, pretty much anything that is going to cause the person pain. Self-harm can include punching walls. It can include constantly picking at the skin. Why? So why do people self-harm if it's not a suicide thing? Well, at my previous school, one of the things that concerned me is that I had several people come to me one year who were self-harming, and it was at least 3, and each of them told me they knew of more people who were doing it. As far as I can tell from the people who have talked to me, self-harm is really about feeling like they don't have anybody to talk to. So this is giving them a form of control. Now, let me talk to you about Tasha. Tasha actually did feel suicidal, and then she considered self-harm, and she tried it out, and for her, it was like a magic pill. Once she started self-harming, she didn't consider suicide anymore because she had an outlet for what was happening around her. Here are some reasons that people have shared with me as far as why they self harm. So, some people self harm because they don't have a safe place. School, they have to put on a show. Home, they have to put on a show. They don't feel like they can be honest with the people that are around them for whatever reason, and it may be an accurate view of the world or it may be inaccurate, but either way, they don't feel like they can share with the world. They may feel like they have emotions that are overwhelming and that this is a way for them to release them. They may feel that they deserve to be punished, so maybe they've done something and they don't feel like anybody would understand or that they could be forgiven for it. They may have absolutely no other coping strategies. So for them, meditation's not working, listening to music's not working, drawing's not working, watching a movie and distracting themselves is not working, food's not working. Everything that they would normally do in order to soothe themselves, none of it's working. And so this is kind of a last effort in order to cope with these feelings. It can also give a person control when they feel like they don't have control anywhere else. This is also one of the things that contributes to eating disorders, is that it is a form of control. One of the difficulties, there are many, is that after the self-harming has ended, well, and even during, there is a worry that people who see the scars are not going to understand. That people will judge, that people will call them weak, will call them crazy. It's a difficult situation to be in. People who are self-harming are typically internalizing their problems, and most of the time, there's no risk of them harming somebody else because they're internalizing everything. So it's my hypothesis that people who are under severe stress will either internalize or externalize their behavior, and then it tends to be one or the other rather than it being both. If they're internalizing, then you see things like self-harm, you see suicidal ideation, if you talk to them, they're going to talk about how they deserve things, how everything's their fault, how nobody cares for them, along those lines. If they are externalizing, then everything that has happened to them is the fault of somebody else. And I think this is where you get into that dangerous zone of, I need to punish the people who have hurt me. And I think that this, more than anything, is contributing to why people do things like shoot their family or go into a bar and commit a shooting or a movie theater or a school or any of these terrible things. So this was a very depressing video, but I felt that it was something that needed to be talked about. I know that there are a ton of resources on the internet. Please look them up if you are feeling low. There is help out there. You have to be willing to look for it. You have to be willing to ask for it. There is no shame in asking for help. It does not mean that you are a bad person. It does not make you weak. As the Bagalal said, it makes you strong. Okay? This is the Fat Health Teacher signing out, and I will see if I can do something a little bit cheerier tomorrow. Thank you.